Thank you, buddy.
What? You got a dog?
Yeah, he's a rescue dog. Name's Weego.
Weego. What kind of name is that?
Call him.
Here we go.
No.
Yep.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Thank you. Here we go.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Here we go.
That's a good boy.
Here we go.
It's the sure sign of a good time. It's just right taste of Bud Light. Here we go.
Weego's about the ugliest dog I ever seen, I think. But he's a good dog, you know? Man. So how many of you have ever had or now have a dog? Ever owned a dog or had a dog as a pet? Yeah, most of you. Most of us probably had. And when you had that dog, or maybe the dog you have now, do you kind of feel like your dog understands you better than anybody else? You know, it seems like it. You can talk to them and everything's fine, and they listen attentively, and there's no problems. They just, they still love you anyway. Doesn't matter what you say. So, as a matter of fact, it seems like sometimes your dog actually talks back to you, doesn't it? You ever notice that? They actually say things to you, You can see it in their eyes or in their actions or whatever. Maybe the thing that you can notice about most is when they run to the door and they have to go out, But at least they're talking to you, They know what they're saying. Today we're beginning a brand new series called Here We Go. And and in this series we're going to be looking at a subject that I've really been avoiding like the plague for about 5+ years. It's the subject of prayer. Believe it or not, you wouldn't think that I would be avoiding such a subject, but I have. I have avoided that subject. The fact is, the Bible seems to have a lot to say about prayer, as you well know. There's lots of different places that talk about prayer, ain't they? Some places in the Bible, Paul says, pray without ceasing. Another place, the Bible tells us to pray for one another, or to pray for our enemies. And then when Jesus was talking, he said, well, when you do pray, be sure to go hide in your closet when you do it, right? Okay. And also there was one time when the disciples asked Jesus, well, teach us how to pray. Show us what's the right way to pray. And Jesus said, well, when you do, pray this way, right? Our Father who art in heaven, all that, And so there's lots of confusion. For me, there's lots of, maybe I'm just simple-minded, but there's lots of confusing stuff there. There's lots of stuff there that seems to raise a lot of questions in my mind about all those kind of things, So I got to tell you that, I've really had a lot of unanswered questions about prayer and about, like what is prayer, right? Or does God answer prayer? And if God does answer prayer, what kind of prayer does God answer? Some prayers, does he answer all prayers? Only the prayer of faith? Only the prayer of a righteous person, And if they're unrighteous people, does God only hear the prayer of salvation from somebody who doesn't know him? Lots of questions for me, I'll put it that way. So I got to tell you right up front that I've kind of learned to strongly dislike the word prayer. It's the word prayer, that subject and that whole thing. But I got to tell you this, and it's not because I don't pray, or not that I don't like to pray, or I'm afraid of praying, or that I don't believe in prayer. It's none of those things. And it's not because I don't believe that God, hears my prayers or doesn't hear my prayers. It's not that I don't believe that God answers my prayers or will, or even that God is too vague about which prayers he does answer and which ones he doesn't. That's not really the problem. Maybe part of the problem, but that's not the biggest part of the problem. That's not the root of the problem, I don't think. Instead, what I found out is that the real problem that I have with prayer is pretty much just the word itself, prayer. And the reason I have so much problems with just the word itself is because there's no definition for it that I can find. As a matter of fact, it's one of those words in the Bible, kind of like the word love. There's at least 3 different words for love in the Bible that are all translated in English as love. On the other hand, prayer there's only one basic word for prayer in the Bible, and it is always and only ever translated as pray or prayer. You may not know this, but there's a lot of other words in the Bible that in the Greek can mean several different things, or there's several different ways of saying it, those kind of things. And so when you read through your Bible, you'll see, you won't notice it, but there are some passages that will have the same exact words as another passage, only the words will be different because it makes more sense in that particular context, or it means this particular thing in this particular context. However, prayer is a word that is always and only translated as pray or prayer. There's never any other words that are used to try to describe it, to define it, to use it within context, meaning this is what this prayer meant, or what this prayer was for, or what that prayer was to, or what it was about, or any of those kind of things. So since there's no other words to clarify or to define or any of those kind of things, the word prayer, then that creates confusion in my mind, and probably in yours too, if you'll think about it. So look at it this way. Let me kind of give you an idea where I'm coming from. If I were to ask you for a definition of prayer, how would you define prayer? What would you say? Well, we ain't got time here this morning to hear everybody's answer, but you can think of your answer, and probably most of us, especially those of us been raised in a religious setting or been in a religious setting for very long, we would probably say something like, prayer is simply talking to or communicating with God. Okay, actually I kind of like that definition, and I think that's a fairly good definition for what prayer is, basically. However, even that definition itself still leaves a lot of room, at least in my simple mind, for a lot of other unanswered questions, like when you talk to or communicate with God, what do you say? How do you say it? What is an acceptable prayer before God? Is it simply a one-sided conversation between you and God, or does God answer you back? Get the idea? And when you talk to God, is asking Him for stuff and or making a special personal request of some kind, is that what prayer is? That part of prayer? Is it a major part of prayer? Is it a minor part of prayer? Is it a part of prayer at all? I don't know. And if and when you ask God for stuff, whatever it might be, even if it's to ask God for somebody for God to benefit someone else other than yourself, does God always give you what you're asked for? Does He always answer that prayer in the positive? Or is it kind of like a waiting game just to see what will happen, and you just never know one way or the other what's going to happen, or when, or how, or if anything, for that matter, right? So again, my opinion is that prayer is probably one of the most widely misunderstood and severely misused concepts, I think, in the entire Bible. Because we all have so many different definitions of what prayer is, and what prayer does, and what prayer is for, and all those kinds of things. So what I want to do today, I want to begin this series, and you'll probably hate me for this, but hopefully you'll get over it, is that what I want to do today by beginning this series is just take a painfully honest look at what, if anything, prayer actually accomplishes. I understand, I'm not saying that God doesn't answer prayer. I'm not saying you should quit praying. I'm not any of those kind of things. I'm just saying let's take a painfully honest look at what, if anything, prayer actually accomplishes. And at least from the standpoint of what most of us think or have probably been taught about what prayer is and what prayer does, that leaves a lot of room for question. So I'm going to warn you right up front that what we're fixing to talk about today will probably challenge your thinking, possibly contradict your theology, and possibly even leave you with more questions than answers. That's okay, because this is a series. It's not just a one-day thing, one-shot deal. So we're going to be talking about some other stuff as we go along over the next couple of weeks. So possibly you'll be left with some questions. That's good. You can think about that during the week. You can formulate some of your own thoughts, ideas, theories, theology, whatever, okay? So here's my disclaimer for today. Here's a disclaimer. Because of the fact that anytime our ideas or our beliefs are challenged, especially when our ideas and beliefs about God are challenged, or something close to us is challenged, like prayer or prayer to God or whatever, anytime what we believe about God is opposed, questioned, and or contradicted, the most common human reaction is anger. Yeah, and get mad. You know, when your thoughts and ideas and your beliefs are challenged, the most common human reaction is anger. You know, to get defiant, you know, to get really ticked off. And often to the point that we simply stop listening altogether. Well, you know, we just shut everything off because we can't handle it. So I'm going to ask you to kind of fight that urge a little bit today, because if we don't ever ask the questions, we'll never come to any answers, right? We just will go right on thinking what we've always thought and believing what we've always believed, and maybe that's not a whole lot, quite honestly. So hang on. Here we go. Oh, you didn't catch that. That's right. You'll catch on later. A few years back, it's been a few years ago now, we got a young horse that I called Cowboy. He was a good-looking horse. He grew out to be about maybe a little past 16 hands. Nice, big, beautiful horse. And he was young when we got him. He was probably a year and a half, 2 years old, something like that. I waited, another year or so, and then I started to ride him, and started to break him to ride. And during that process, one evening I was out kind of late. It was close to sundown and all those kind of things. You know, the light changes, things get different. And he got spooked and reared up, straight up on his hind legs. And I just, instead of, what I did is I missed the saddle horn. I would have been all right if I'd have caught the saddle horn. All I had was the reins in my hand. And if you all have ever ridden a horse, you know that the harder you pull on the reins, the more he's going to go over backwards, right? So I had two choices: either pull him over on top of me or turn loose of the reins and go over the back myself, just by myself, which I did. And when I did, I landed on the ground and broke this wrist and cracked a couple of ribs right here on my chest when I landed. Of course, all I did was, I won't tell you that, all part of the story. But, it was kind of one of those things. So throughout that process then, of course, went to the doctor, and they didn't have to set my wrist. I'd already done that before I got there. And they took x-rays of my wrist and stuff. And a few days later, I was still having problems with my chest. And they said, well, why don't we just get an x-ray there just to be sure, there's nothing else going on, blood clot or whatever that kind of thing might be. And so finally what ended up happening was as they took the x-rays, especially of my chest, and when I was in for having those x-rays, they took x-ray about this far up. And then they took another x-ray about this far up. And then she said, wow, you've got really long lungs. That's what she said. She was lying. And then she took another x-ray. Well, what the doctors found is that I had a very large growth lump in my growth of some kind. It's been there for many, many years inside my chest, growing in there for lots of years. Actually part of thyroid. It was completely disconnected from thyroid, but was a piece of thyroid. And it was pressing on one of the arteries of my heart. So, of course, the very next appointment I had with the doctor, when they found this large size mass in there, about the size of your fist, the very first appointment when I went to talk to the doctor, he says, you have cancer. We will be sending you to MD Anderson, but we've got to do a few tests first. All right, cool. So over the next months, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever that was, seemed like 4, 5, 6 years actually, they did test after test after test. Fine needle biopsies, x-rays, gamma, or that, what am I trying to say? the radioactive x-rays, they did all kinds of stuff. I mean, anything, PET scans, all kinds of stuff, you know. What they were doing was trying to find out where the cancer was, how much there was, what kind of cancer it was, all those different kind of things before they ever cut me open. That's what the whole idea was, right? Well, the fact is that during that particular period of time, as you might well imagine, if you've ever been in a situation like that, you already know you pray with everything you've got, right? You are as sincere as you ever are in your entire life. Lord, just let there not be any cancer. They won't find any cancer. Well, ultimately, they did not. However, there was still one more step to go, and that was when they had to cut my chest open, reach down in there and get that chunk out of there and throw it away. Well, they didn't throw it away, cut it open and actually test the actual mass. No cancer there either. None. So all this time, you know, what I'm saying is, we're talking about prayer, remember? All this time I'm praying with every time I went in for another test, I'd pray, God, please, just don't let them find any cancer. And they didn't. And then they say, well, we got to send you in for another test, over and over and over again. And then to get into the hospital and find out, and, you know, to get the final ultimate, you know, for sure, this is it, whether you have cancer or not, you know. And they did that slice before they ever sewed me up. They did that frozen, whatever they call it, and tested it, and no cancer. So I was clean, perfectly clean, no problems, no problems. How many of you ever prayed like that? Anybody ever prayed really, really sincerely about stuff? Yeah, you're really sincere about that time, aren't you? You're as sincere as you could ever be. And maybe you've confessed every possible sin you can think of. You rededicated your life 5 or 6 times. You know what I'm saying, right? I mean, wow, you know, it's a big deal for us a lot of times. So the reason I tell you that story is because it caused me to really rethink my beliefs and or understanding about prayer. It caused me to question what specifically my stressful, under duress, fervent begging and pleading might or might not have accomplished with God. So here's a basic fact. Here's the basic fact that I began with. And probably some of you will relate to this as well. Is that I already know that there are a lot of other people out there. I already know this. I'm a pastor. I visit people in the hospital and sick people, all that stuff all the time. I already know that there's a lot of other people out there that are probably more righteous than I am, that pray at least as fervently as I did about their situation, about their cancer, maybe even their cancer, and they don't get healed and they die anyway. So, where does that lead you, right? So let me just share some questions that I have about, or had, that began to really shake my faith and cause me to question actually my entire concept of what prayer is and what prayer does. First question, knowing that other people are probably more righteous than I am, and you all know me, you know I'm not that great of a guy. I'm not that holy. I'm not that you don't just shake your head this way, not that way. And there are a lot of other people out there that are at least as righteous, if not more righteous than I am, that pray the same way. So here's the first question, is does prayer change God's mind? Is prayer the key to changing God's mind? Is that what it takes in order to cause God to do something different or to change your situation or to alter the nature of reality, basically? Because the reality is there's people out there that got cancer, and they die from cancer no matter how hard they pray. Does prayer cause God to alter the nature of reality? So the fact is, if I literally did have cancer, but they never did find any, then did God change the eventual and or inevitable in my life? maybe some of us, or maybe most of us would say, yeah, God healed you. You know, prayer changes things, you know. With God, all things are possible. Okay, assuming, for the sake of argument, that prayer literally does cause God to change things and or alter the nature of reality, does that mean I have power over God? Does that mean I had more power over God than the next guy does? Because God healed me and not them? You know? I mean, is it possible that as long as we meet all the criteria of a fervent, effectual prayer, honestly, sincerely believing, without any wavering or doubting, that God has no choice but to answer our prayer no matter what it is? Good question, huh? I skipped a verse a while back, James chapter 5 and verse 16. Is it possible to skip back to that? I don't know. Where he says, the fervent, effectual prayer of a righteous man availeth much. That's King James. You've probably all heard that, right? That worries me, because it seems like James is giving us this formula for saying this is the key in prayer to making God, you know, forcing God to have to change his mind or to change the nature of reality. But if you follow that through to its logical conclusion, that means that if you don't get what you've asked for, then it's your fault. You didn't have enough faith, you weren't fervent enough, you didn't beg God enough, you didn't get your life straightened out enough, you weren't righteous enough. I mean, there's a bazillion things then that all become your fault at that point. Is because if prayer does change God's mind to cause God to alter the nature of reality, then why does he not alter the nature of reality for you, but he does for somebody else? Or why does he change alter the nature of reality for you and not for someone else? Well, that one's easier, isn't it? Because I did it right. Right? That's why God changed the nature of reality for me and not you, is because I did it. I'm righteous. I'm more righteous than you are. Simple as that, right? Makes for good, whatever. However, my question is, how in the world, what could we as mere mortals possibly have to say that would convince God to do anything other than what God is going to do? I told you, you're going to end up with more questions than answers, and you're going to be all ticked off at me before you leave here. But that's okay. Just fight that for a little bit, because it'll be okay. We're going to think these things through and see what we can come to here. So let me tell you something really important right here. Prayer is not a formula or a magic potion. And not what it is. And God is not a genie. A lot of people treat God like a genie, thinking, okay, if I just do this right, you know, rub the lamp just right, God will have to do what I ask him to do. But listen, we don't need to try to protect God's reputation by saying, oh yeah, God answers prayer, you know. You don't need to protect God's reputation. He's God, not you. So if you're just, agreeing with those things because, well, you don't want to get on God's bad side, you don't need to protect God. He don't need your protection. He's okay all by himself, by his own self. Okay, so what does the word prayer mean then? That's really where we need to come to. What does the word prayer actually mean? Is there a better way of translating it? Are there other words that might work in its place that might help us to better understand what prayer is? Well, actually, the original Greek word translated as prayer in the English is proseuche, or proseuche, I think is the correct, if I read the thing right. And that word proseuche, I'm going to say it proseuche, literally means to worship or an oratory. So I thought, okay, if prayer has something or a lot to do with worship, if it's to worship or an oratory, to speak, to talk, then maybe I better look up the word worship and find out what worship is. And what I found is very interesting, I think. What I found is that the word worship is actually a compound of two words. Here's the first one. The P-R-O-S on the first, pros, which means to or toward, and it's proskuneo, I guess is how you say the Greek word. I don't know. And so it's the first part of that word is to or toward. So you say, okay, well, to or toward whom or what? Well, that's a good question. But since we're talking about God, then let's define it. Let's confine it to or toward God himself, the God of this universe, not any other God. And hopefully our worship, when we talk about worship, is toward God, not anything else. And then the other part of that word, K-U-N-E-O, which comes from the base word of K-U-O-N, and actually that word literally means dog in the Greek. Oh, that's weird. Yeah, it's strange, you know? However, the further definition there is that it literally means to kiss the hand or to do homage to, or like your dog does, you know? When you come home after a long day and your dog his tail is wagging the dog. He just can't wait to see you. He is so happy that you are home. You are the best person in his life ever, right? That's what he's talking about here. So worship then is one of those things where God is somebody that we just can't wait to see and to talk to. And prayer then is what we say when we talk to God. So what I want you to get out of this today then is just this. Why is it that some people would rather talk to their dog than to anybody else? I think you probably already know the answer to that. She sang a song earlier that talked about gossip. You know, your dog won't gossip on you. Your dog won't tell nobody else what you said, right? And it doesn't, you know, and my dog doesn't care how bad my day has been or what kind of language I use. You are the sorriest, ugliest little dog I've ever seen, right? Nor does my dog ever judge me for anything that I might say or how I say it. He simply listens with attentive ears, with great interest, with great joy, you know, and continues to love me anyway, no matter who I am or what I've done or where I've been. As a matter of fact, all he wants to do is just be where I am. That's all he cares about. So I need to tell you something. What I get out of this, at this point, is you are God's best friend. I know it seems kind of backwards in some ways, but we're God's best friend. And what God talks about, what the Bible talks about in prayer is that kind of an idea, is that God wants us then to just be happy in his presence, to know he's there, to no matter what we say, he never talks back. He doesn't judge us. He doesn't tell everybody else what we've said. None of those kind of things. It's kind of a mixed up thing in my mind yet. But I think you get the idea, because that's what prayer and worship is about. It's about just enjoying God's presence, and God literally enjoying our presence. No matter what you say or what you do or where you've been or what you've done, God is not there to judge you or to pass judgment on you or to spank you when you get out of line or any of those kind of things. He loves you anyway. But you are God's best friend, and He wants us to relate to Him in that way. God is just simply overjoyed that you are His and that He is yours. However, the problem is most of us act more like cats. Lord bless y'all.